name is Paul. I'm a staff, on staff with NFR, working with the BHCA. And today I'd like to welcome Marcia Malzahn. She is the president and co-founder of Malzahn Strategic, a community financial institution management consultancy focused on strategic planning, enterprise risk management, treasury management, and talent management. Marci has 30 years of banking experience, 10 of those years as the EVP and CFO and COO of a community bank she founded, where she oversaw all areas of operation. In her last year as EVP, COO, and CRO, Marci created and focused on the bank's enterprise risk management program. Marci is the recipient of several professional awards, is a published author of 4 books, and an international bilingual keynote speaker, speaking frequently at banking and credit union conferences and associations, as well as leadership and women's conference. As a certified virtual presenter, Marci also provides online and on-site training for financial institutions. Marci is a certified life coach and a certified community bank director. She holds a Bachelor of Association in Management from Bethel University and is a graduate and faculty of the Graduate School of Banking in Madison, Wisconsin. Please welcome Marcia Malzahn.
Thank you so much for the introduction and welcome. I am your substitute teacher for today, so be nice. Welcome to our session, Enterprise Risk Management and the role that it plays in your M&A activities. I'm passionate about enterprise risk management for 2 main reasons. One is my life experiences. I'm originally from Nicaragua, and when I was 6 years old, I survived an earthquake that killed 10,000 people. I could have been one of them. Then I lived through the revolution when I was 12 and 13 years old, and we fled to Dominican Republic. Each one of these is a whole story. And we were refugees in Dominican Republic for 6.5 years, but after only 2 months of arriving, we survived Hurricane David, the hurricane of the century. I was still 13. And we spent 2 months with no water or electricity. And in 1986, I moved to Minnesota with my suitcase. So here I am. The rest is history, like they say. My husband is from Minnesota. We've been married 33 years. We have 2 kids and 1 grandbaby who's 2.5. And the second one is coming in 2 weeks. Super exciting time in our lives. So I wanted to share with you that about me so you get to know me a little better. But at the same time, because of my life experiences, that made me really passionate about ERM. I don't live in fear, but I'm very risk aware. And I also live with the appreciation and awareness that I can lose everything I have and everyone or anyone that I have today. But the second reason also that I'm passionate about ERM is because I saw what it did for my team. When I co-founded Tradition Capital Bank here in Edina in 2005. And that's where I got the opportunity when the bank was like 5 years old, 250 million in assets. I got the opportunity to create my first ERM program. And when, as we went through the process, I saw what it did for my team, where the HR person was now interested in technology in credit in finance. And it was amazing that my employees realized, wow, 2 things. I'm not the most important person in the bank. It's like, I know, I could have told you that. But then also, the bank can go down from any door or open that we leave open, door or window that we leave open. And they started caring for each other's areas and understanding that the risks are all there and we're all in this together to protect the institution. The best analogy I can tell you is at home, you have doors and windows, right, that you need to close and lock up before you go on vacation, before you leave, to protect the house from the elements and from the thieves. But you also need to protect it from inside. If you have children, we have to teach them not to plug the toilets with toys or to burn down the house, right? So now if you take that concept to your institution, who's watching every little window or door that could harm your institution, right? Is everybody watching for one another? So these are all the different kinds of events that can affect us and impact our lives. Natural disasters, man-made disasters like the terrorist attacks, and of course we have the pandemic that we are still living through. So today, we're going to talk about, I always like to start at the top with the umbrella, thinking that is your strategic planning, okay? And we'll talk about ERM building blocks, elements, and the components, definition of ERM, what I call the ERM puzzle, the 3 phases of ongoing ERM activities, setting risk appetite and tolerance, the ERM program flowchart, everything from beginning to end, so you can understand how to, in a simple way, high level, how you would implement an ERM program. And then how it affects and why you need to think about it during any M&A activity. And then we'll bring it all together. We'll have time for questions. So starting with your strategic plan, the strategic plan has components, right? ERM in the past has never been part of it. So I'll say this a couple of times. There's 2 ways to integrate enterprise risk management with your strategic planning process. When you're doing strategic planning, one of your objectives is to come up with your top 3 to 5 main objectives, right? As you come up with your goals, objectives, whatever you want to call them, ask this question: what are our emerging risks coming from these objectives, initiatives that we want to pursue? On the other side, when you conduct an ERM risk assessment, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, the enterprise risk assessment, enterprise risk management risk assessment, you assess all the different risk categories that can potentially impact your organization. And after that exercise, which typically, it takes me like a day and a half, you talk about every single risk: capital, liquidity, HR, legal, compliance, all of those. You're going to come up with like 20-some risks, but you need to prioritize them. What are the top 5 to 10 risks that we at our organization have? Then you ask this question: what are our strategies to mitigate our top risks? That you can put in a 1-pager and insert it in your strategic plan, and that is what your board of directors needs to know. That's your liability as a board director. So ERM is a big part, should be integrated and included in your strategic planning. Just the same as your marketing plan, your capital plan, your business plan, financials, talent management. Hardly any bank has a formal talent management program. That is the people side. And the connector between talent management, strategic planning, and ERM is succession planning. That is one of the top risks that I'm finding across the nation with different institutions, the lack of succession planning. And not only at the CEO level, board of directors, C-level, or leadership. How about the deposit operations person that has been with your bank for 30 or 40 years? Who is going to get that knowledge? Who's going to do those jobs? This is what I call the ERM building blocks. ERM has different areas that are part of ERM. As we go through today's presentation, you'll find out that you have a lot of the pieces of the puzzle. The elements, it needs to be planned, it needs to be strategic, you need to have all of these different components to have a complete ERM program. Sorry. Definitions. We're going to go through some of all of these definitions regarding ERM, and then the components. You're going to find that under the ERM umbrella, you have different programs and sub-programs. That's why sometimes it's so hard to understand the concept of ERM, because it's multidimensional and it has different components. Okay, so we'll go through those. I'm not going to read these to you guys. These are different definitions of ERM from the Institute of Internal Auditors, from the Federal Reserve. I just want you to look at certain highlighted words, structured, consistent, it's a continuous process, it's a discipline. This here is a definition from COSO. If you haven't had any contact with COSO, the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Tradeway Commission, they are the ones who started the ERM conversation in the 1980s. And this organization is ERM for anyone, not just for banks, but I have learned a ton from them. I decided, because I keep everything very simple and with simple English, an enterprise-wide continuous process to protect all your organization's assets while allowing you to fulfill your vision. That is the best definition. I carefully chose every word to, explain what ERM is about. These are some of the ERM building blocks, the elements, okay? So you have to have proactive planning, just like your strategic planning. You have to have a plan for ERM. You create policies or develop policies to comply with regulations. Then you put in place practices, procedures, processes to make sure you comply with your own policies. You establish parameters. Those are the thresholds, the metrics, the tolerances that you put in place to measure where you are in risk. So you can protect your assets, and then you can have the outcomes that you want. Now, there are some components that every ERM program has, starting at the top. The board of directors decides we're going to have an ERM program. The first thing that you need to do is to create or develop a risk committee at the board level. How many of you have a risk committee at the board level? Okay, 3 of you. That's very common. How many of you have audit committees? Probably everyone, right? So what boards of directors are doing is one of 3 things. One, they are merging audit and risk committee because you don't have that many people, right? And that's totally okay to do, but when you do that, make sure that you understand that the audit committee members look at past performance. This is what happened. These are the internal controls, the financial statements. Risk looks like the future. What are the emerging risks? So they have to completely change perspectives when they have that dual role. The second thing they're doing is they're creating or forming a separate risk committee with different directors, 2 or 3. You need at least 3. And the third thing they're doing is that the entire board wants to be in the risk committee because it includes everything in the entire bank. So you need to establish a risk committee and therefore write a risk committee charter. The purpose of the charter is, that's what you write on there. You need to establish an ERM policy, just like all the other policies. What is your policy for enterprise risk management? You need to identify from all of those risk categories which ones affect our organization, so you need to do that assessment. You use a tool, which if any of you wants to contact me after, I can send you a free tool. It's an Excel spreadsheet, a template that I created to create an ERM risk assessment for all of those categories. That I call it the ERM risk assessment matrix. You also conduct a ton of risk assessments already, right? So where are you keeping track of those? What are the findings? Are you fixing all of those findings at every level? The next piece of the puzzle is called the board risk appetite and tolerance statement, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. This is one of the, I bet probably not, maybe one of you, who has a board risk appetite and tolerance statement. That is one that is very hard to do because what it says is the appetite is the what. What do we want to offer our customer? What products? What do we want to do? What do we want to be known for? And then the tolerance statement part is your metrics, your thresholds. So, for example, if you're going to offer construction loans, that's your new product, right? That's the what. You have an appetite for construction loans. But the tolerance would be, we only want our construction loan portfolio to make up 20% of our entire real estate portfolio. That's your metric. So you put metrics and tolerances in place so you can measure and ring the bell when things are going too high. Then you have and then you integrate it into your strategic plan. Now, there are other areas, and I tell you, you all have pieces of this puzzle because the regulators have been asking for the pieces. They're starting to ask for a formal ERM program, especially if you're already over the billion, but they're starting to ask for one from 500 to a billion. You can get away without one at the 250 or 300 million, that's okay, but they're starting to ask. I created my first ERM program when the bank was only 250 million. And when the regulators, FDIC came, I'm like, Mike, here's my first complete program. Give me feedback. 2.5 later, this is during the safety and soundness exam. Marci, here's your program. Great job. And I'm like, do you have any feedback? And he's like, no. You're the only and little bank that at 250 million gave me a complete program. So keep doing what you're doing. Great. And I'm like, well, I need help, right? So then I decided to create my own framework, and that's what I'm teaching and educating on right now. But every one of the, so what they told me when I asked, I said, well, do you require an ERM program? And they're like, no, not yet, but we've been requiring pieces. So BSA program, who doesn't have a cybersecurity program, right? Who doesn't have a vendor management program? Who doesn't have a compliance management system? All of those, you need to have an internal audit. Those are all pieces of this puzzle. Liquidity contingency funding plan, you have to have a capital plan. I put here succession plan because they're starting to ask for written succession plan at all levels. And then of course the IT security program, if we go one layer deeper, and this is where it gets a little more complex, because your IT security program is kind of the umbrella for other sub-programs. That's where your cybersecurity program lives, your vendor management. Security controls is everything for your network, your password policies, your patch management, your backup policies, all of those things, firewalls, switches, all of that. And then you have social engineering. I used to tell my employees, I can have 10 firewalls. We're the ones who screw everything up. We are the ones who click on the links. We leave the little shredding bin with sensitive data. Oh, I forgot to throw it in the bigger bin. We forget to lock up our file cabinets at night. I used to do that, 7 p.m., go around the bank, locking cabinets, and all it takes is one bad cleaning person, and there goes your sensitive data. So social engineering, you have to continually train on social engineering all the time. And then, of course, your business continuity plan. I don't know if you read that the FFIEC in November of 2019, they published a guidance saying it's no longer just business continuity plan. We want you to call it now business continuity management because it's an ongoing management. Furthermore, BCM, BCP, and disaster recovery plan, DRP, it doesn't belong only in IT. We always give it to the IT people. It belongs to everyone. Everyone is in charge because you're continuing to do business at every level. Of course, the IT sets up the infrastructure. So this is what I call the ERM puzzle. So you have strategic plan, ERM is a big component, ERM has these programs, and then like each one of these programs has sub-components underneath. And I could even go a layer deeper. Under IT security program, you have vendor management. For example, the whole vendor management program has its own subcomponents. You have to do a vendor management due diligence, risk assessment, your policy, your classifying and categorizing and monitoring and reporting. One of the key risks that you're going to face in the future, and this is included, should be something in your strategic planning or in your risk assessment, is vendor management. And the question that regulators are asking right now is, who are your vendors' vendors? We're talking now fourth party. Who are your vendors' vendors? Because we're giving, especially, your critical vendors. We're like, we can't do due diligence on everyone. Well, your critical vendors are the ones that have access to your confidential data, and they're critical to running your business. So if you have those two things, those are critical vendors. And who do they use? If you're working with fintechs, now, who are the fintechs vendors and suppliers? And think about this, fintechs, what do? They develop software, right? Who are their developers? Are they people in India or other countries? What if they lose that? Then the software won't be updated, it can be gone. So you have to think about all of that. And also on vendor management, when we go through disasters, ask them the question, do you have a disaster recovery plan? And can you service me? What were the results of the testing, right? Can you service me if a disaster happens in your area? These are 3 ongoing phases of ERM. You identify first from the risk categories, then you assess what is the consequence if this risk happens to us. Then what are our tools to mitigate and eliminate possibly some of these risks that we have? And then how are we going to monitor that we're doing what we're saying to mitigate, that we assess, that we identify? And then who's going to do the reporting to the board? The board of directors needs to get your top 5 to 10 risks, your mitigating strategies, and they need to know that your management team knows the risks. One of the major things that regulators want you to know is your risk story. You know, when loans go bad and we have these watch lists and those credit that are pages and pages, we're telling the story of the business. The regulators want us to know our risk story. What is our risk profile and why has it changed? How has it changed through the years? So this cycle never stops. So that's why they call it the 3 ongoing. Setting risk management appetite. COSO, as I said before, risk appetite, they say risk appetite is the amount of risk an entity is willing to accept in the pursuit of value with what you want to pursue and achieve. So to determine risk appetite, you have to do 3 things. You have to agree, board and management have to agree on 3 things. You have to develop your risk appetite. Remember, that's the what. What do we want to offer? What kind of products? Technologically speaking, are you going to be advanced in technology? Do you want to be up front? Do you want to be a lagging, in technology? Communication, communicating the risk appetite to your entire staff, and then monitoring and updating risk appetite. Example of that, if you've never offered hotel lending, and I know that's a bad example these days because you probably wouldn't want to start right now, but let's say you start, that's one of the things you want to start. At that moment, when the board makes that decision, your risk appetite changed and your risk profile. Now you're going to offer a different kind of lending that you didn't have before. So from the risk universe, these are all the possibilities of things that you could offer. What you can bear to lose, that's your tolerance. How much can you lose? How much can you, and stay solvent, right? And then the risk appetite is at the top. It should be the smallest of all. So I'm going to take you through the ERM flowchart, what I call, from beginning to end, of how you would implement an ERM program in your bank. Like I said before, the tone at the top, the board of directors says, we want to formalize our ERM program. So you form the board risk committee. Then the president CEO designates your internal ERM leader, and the leader can be your chief risk officer or VP of risk or risk manager. They have different titles, but know this, one person cannot do this alone at all. There's no way one person in the bank knows all the risks. They have to do it as a team, which is why a byproduct is team building. So then you select your ERM committee. This ERM committee is made out of people or staff, leaders or not in leadership position, but all your areas of the bank must be represented. One person could represent more than one area, but everything should be represented, from the tellers to cash management, lending, the sales side, mortgage, wealth management. Everything that you do needs to be represented. So you develop the board risk committee charter and the ERM policy, and then you integrate the ERM into your strategic plan, as I shared. Then you move to phase 1, which is you set the risk management appetite. You need to establish key performance indicators. For example, ROA, ROE, net interest margin, efficiency ratios, Texas ratios, all of those. Some of those key performance indicators you can also use as key risk indicators. The key risk indicators can go from anything from the global to market to your city to your county. Then you do a list of all the types of risk and you identify which ones are the risks that are unique to you. In the phase 1, identifying and assessing risk, you need to identify what is unique to you. Do you have a specific unique risk? Succession planning is a risk across industries and across the nation. Is it an issue for your institution? Do you have a relationship or industry concentration? You may be an egg lender. You may have a specific in the industry like entertainment and like the hotels and restaurants, or you can be an SBA lender, etc. So categorizing risk by criticality, like I said before, how critical is this type of risk for the institution to run the business, and then confidentiality, access to your data. Then you rate the risk by impact. How can this impact our institution? And how probable is it that this particular risk category, like liquidity, capital, one of those, technology, can impact us? How vulnerable are we right now when we're conducting the risk assessment? And how fast could this risk arise? These are all the types of risk categories. The OCC typically only shows you like 8 of them. Like operational, they mixed with technology. I like to separate them. Compliance, strategic, reputational, legal, capital, etc. So another note on the risk categories, they are all interrelated. One risk will impact others. If you have credit risk, you may have eventually, of course, capital risk, earnings risk. You're going to have reputational risk. You may have legal risk. So in the pandemic truly affected every single risk category. We had HR with the people side. We had credit, which it may not manifest till next year from what I'm hearing, because the PPP came in. Operational, how do we do things now? Compliance, new policies, new regulations came out, so etc. It got all affected. So then you list all the risk assessments for each area. You identify risk assessments that you're doing and that whatever you're missing. You incorporate all the other components, meaning go through the checklist. I've given you all. Do we have the IT security program? Is that tested? Do we have DRP, BCP, every one of those? You establish a standard assessment criteria. That means the scales. If 1 is low and 5 is extreme, use the same scale across your risk assessments so everybody can understand them. Use qualitative and quantitative questions for your risk assessments. Conduct all the risk assessments and make sure that you track the findings. The regulators don't like the repeat finding. That's the worst. Assess risk interactions. I already shared how they are all interrelated. You prioritize your risk based on ranking and criteria. The next 2 slides are just a list of risk assessments that I have gathered from all kinds of banks, so they're under the different buckets, under credit, compliance, technology. The only thing I want you to notice is that sometimes we risk assess one area or product from different perspectives. Wire transfer is the perfect example. We risk assess wire transfer from the compliance. Are we complying with our regulations, policies that we put in place? From the technology, are we offering multi-factor authentication methods to our customers? And then from the internal controls, do we have dual control, segregation of duties internally to do wire transfer? So these are different risk assessments that the same area or product gets risk assessed. But in all the interrelated risks, your reputation is always on the line. So if you have legal risk, your reputation is on the line. HR, credit, compliance, anything, it's always going to affect your reputation. And especially, with vendor management, going back to how important that is, customers don't care who you use behind the scenes. They care that it works and that their data is safe. And if it breaks, it's all your fault. They don't care who's behind the scenes. If it breaks or if you get a breach, data breach, it's your fault. We have no out, and it's all our reputation on the line. So the phase 2, you list the mitigating factors for each of your risks that you identified. That's when you establish your policies, like I said, to comply with regulations, procedures, and processes to comply with your own policies. You hopefully can eliminate some risks. So this is where you determine how can we eliminate. So let's say that I do know someone, a president of a bank, that during the financial crisis, they got really hit with construction lending, so the board decided no more construction lending. So that's a strategic decision. They got rid of the construction lending risk, but they also got rid of the opportunity. Remember, when you're assessing new initiatives, products, you have both. You're assessing the opportunity and you're assessing the risk. You also have to make sure that you're okay with the residual risk. So you have an activity, has an inherent risk. For example, you may be going through some of these things. When I was at the bank, we only had 2 tellers. And they had to open accounts, make deposits, do all of those things, and then we run into the lack of dual controls and segregation of duties issues. It always came up for the regulators and our auditors. So what did we do? We acknowledged the risk. We put policies in place and processes, so one person would open the account, a second person would make the deposit, a third person in deposit ops would make sure that all the documentation was fine and that it was a legitimate customer and transaction. So that the residual risk, we were fine with that, and it always passed, you know. Then phase 3, I know you have to go, thank you. Identify monitoring tools for each risk. You identify improvement areas. Do you have to update a policy? Are you moving to a software solution? So for example, one of the first software solutions that people use is vendor management, and then they move to risk management. I know people from end contracts that they do a great job at integrating, so look for software solutions that are integrated. So you start reporting on monitoring activities, and you create a reporting process. During this phase, the monitoring and reporting is when you ensure that the policies, the procedures, the processes, two things, that they're working and that they're being used by your employees, that they're doing what you want them to do. And then establish a reporting process. Who's going to report to the board, and what kind of tools are you going to use? I know that the board wants to see, tell me a one-pager, get to the point, don't give me the 20 pages, that can be background, you know, and that's what we want. So I'm going to show you 3 examples of tools. This one is from COSO. They call it the Combined Risk and Opportunity Map Example. So if we're following the construction lending example, we can say, well, as an opportunity, moderate opportunity that we can make money, and it's likely that we can be successful. On the risk side assessment, well, we have a moderate, you know, we don't have an expert on construction lending. We're going to have to hire someone. So we'll have moderate risk, and it's likely that we will have some risk. So it's a very simple, subjective type of map. This one is called the heat map. And if I had more room, I would have put all the risks here, the risk categories. The best example I can give you is when I was at the bank, you know, the home Dalar, right? You've heard of that, and how tricky it is and how easy it is to make mistakes, right? Well, our employees were screwing up consistently, and we actually got a civil money penalty for like $3,000. We're like freaking out, you know, and so we're like, we're going to train the heck out of these people. I mean, we train them. So first, we would place the one in the red. It's likely that we're going to continue to make mistakes, and the impact can be big if we keep screwing up, right? So then 2 years it took us to where we, the ERM committee, could confidently tell the board, we're in the green. We're now trained. We have everyone in different areas. We know what we're doing. So we moved it to a 1. So that's how you would use that. This one, I created it to report to the board. Once your ERM committee, you do a board risk appetite and tolerance statement, your ERM committee could report to you on a quarterly basis, very subjective, again, green, yellow, red, and explain, okay, credit, right now we feel that we're doing well. This is for institutions that don't have a software solution yet that gives you and spits out all these colorful graphs and all that. This is a super simple, subjective way to tell your board, we, the ERM committee, feel that we're in the green, we're good, our asset quality is good, we don't have that many, our non-performing assets is doing great, you know, whatever. And then you move down the line. The interest rate risk, I put it in red right now just because I think everybody's having high risk there. But a couple of notes here that I put in yellow. Technology, no matter how good you feel, I will never feel comfortable enough to put it on the green. You have to be on your guard every single day. That's number 1 top risk that we're all facing. So you set up your board risk appetite and tolerance statement. I also created what I call the strategic risk assessment for new initiatives. That's a Word document. It's questions from the strategic perspective and from the risk perspective. Whenever you're going to do a new initiative, a new product, a new division, a new branch, close or open, whatever it is, run it through those questions, because from the strategic perspective, you want to make sure that it fits and it aligns with your vision, mission, your core values, all of that in your long term. Do we want to do this? Do we want to offer this kind of product? And then from the risk perspective, you're asking the questions, what new risk is this initiative bringing in? You know, And then what I recommend is you do the ERM risk assessment, you meet, you meaning the ERM committee meets 2 months in a row, and then they go quarterly, and then they start reporting. So monthly progress reports bring up new initiatives. Then you have your quarterly emerging risk review. Quarterly meetings are to review your ERM, tracking. What do we need to do next? Are we on track to mitigate all these risks that we identified? And then once you have your whole program, once a year, you review the ERM policy, the risk committee charter, the internal ERM committee charter, and then you review the whole program, and you present it to the board as a package once a year. The last piece that I want to show you is, there's stages of integration progression for ERM. You're either in the reactive, aware, or strategic stage. The reactive, nobody even knows what ERM is. I tell you, 7 years ago when I started this, I would ask people in this conference, how is your ERM, and they're like, what's ERM? So we need to train everyone and have a risk-aware culture. Everyone needs to know the risk. We just need to be aware of what our own risks are. No planning, you're missing risk coverage areas. Now, I believe that most community banks, especially under $1 billion, are in the aware. You're recognizing at the board of directors that you probably should have a more formalized. Everything that I do is from the best practices perspective. So establishing an ERM program, if you're under $1 billion, is going to be from the best practices perspective. Although I'm hearing that banks that are in the 5, 6 million, 800 million, their regulators are starting to ask for an ERM program. You identified a risk leader, and some key risks are defined, and you recognize the need. Hopefully, the goal is to get to the strategic stage where you have an ERM program complete. Everyone has this risk awareness culture. You do real-time analysis on your loan portfolios, for example, and you have done risk assessments. You are proactive now. So I ask you, where do you feel that you are right now? Are you reactive, aware, strategic, or as a board member, you're not sure where your bank is at right now? So how does all of that have to do with M&As? If you are a purchasing bank, I would ask your prospective, do they have an ERM program? Ask these questions. What kind of pieces of the puzzles do they have? Do they have a formalized program? If you're a selling bank and you're interested in that, then I really encourage you to put in place an ERM program. You're going to be better prepared. And then, there's so many benefits. I'm going to go through them real quick here. You establish best practices, enterprise-wide. Efficiencies. I have a client that we went through the process. They discovered a report that was being printed, left in the copy room every day, 10,000 pages a month of sensitive data in the copy room. So because they weren't asking the questions, they found out they could do it online, and you initiate, to check that somebody checked it. You establish an ERM process. It builds the team, creates awareness. It gives you the opportunity to assess risk as well as the opportunities. It really prepares you for the future. When our bank was $250 million, I asked the IT director, I said, okay, let's start working on what does it take to have an infrastructure for a $500 million. So what are you doing to prepare for the future infrastructure-wise, right? And also, of course, with talent and all of that. It creates accountability. When you meet quarterly and you start asking the questions, and that's how I do the strategic planning sessions as well. We do quarterly meetings. Every leader has their own, you got to keep people accountable. And they're accountable to each other when we meet, Helps anticipate risk, enhance enterprise resilience. What is the one major thing that we all have learned from the pandemic at the personal level and at the bank level is to be resilient, because we need to continually change and adjust. So you create a sound infrastructure and a solid foundation, and you can tell your story from the risk perspective. So now that's kind of the quick presentation. I'm going to open it up for questions, and then I'll bring it all together and we'll finish. Yes.
You know, Marci, we do all these things, but they're all over the place.
Yes.
Some falls under compliance, some falls under audit. And if we're going to put together a good program, if it's on a board level, and a risk, do we have a good, I mean, I assume you could help us with a good charter. How does that not overlap with compliance and audit and all these other things that we have going on? Because they all feel like they're all part of it. Like you say, it's all part of it.
They're all part of it, and thank you for that question, because one of the biggest challenges is silos. Everyone is on their own little pillar, you know, and how do we bring it all together? The ERM policy is its own policy. It has nothing to do with, you know, with the compliance or the BSA policy and all of that. The risk committee charter is its own. It's what is the purpose? Why do we have this charter? You know, it's to help. The purpose of the risk committee is to help, you know, it's to oversee the enterprise risk management program. The purpose of the ERM committee internally is to help management and the board in the oversight and implementation of everything. So, did you have any other question?
So that, I mean, if we have an exam, do they report directly to the examiners? Do they ask for our ERM plan, such as strategic plan? Or?
What I prepare is an ERM program document that brings it all together, you know, and many people, you know, they can do it, you know, I can guide them, and so you prepare one document, and then what I do at the end is kind of like go through the checklist, so you can say all of these other pieces are in their own place. So you communicate that you have all those pieces. You know, IT security program, we have that. But then, of course, you have to give them that when they ask you, you know.
So the charter and the board is check the boxes, make sure they're all done, or?
Well, part of, you know, when I do ERM implementation, I do it in 4 phases. That phase 4, when we have all the first documents and all of that done, is when I go through checklist of, you know, your IT security program. Okay, I want to talk to your IT guy or person, you know, and say, do you have this? Do you do penetration testing? What are you doing with social engineering? Did you test your DRP? What were the results? You know, all of that is a ton of questions to make sure that I don't do penetration or anything like that. I make sure you do it through the experts on that, you know. But it's asking the right questions, and it's for the regulators to have one central place where you can say, yeah, I do have a program, and we have it formalized. Everyone is aware of it, and here's all the pieces.
Which I think the difference is we're doing all of it, just not doing it all at one spot.
I can talk to you more later and help you with that, because I know what you mean. Yeah, go ahead.
Similar question. We have a pretty robust internal audit program, and what we've done is we've kind of called, so we have monthly meetings that's called the risk management compliance meeting, and so we have each functional area report out monthly that we call the monitoring reports, and it's on the compliance side, it's, hey, these are the main things from a compliance perspective that we need to do to keep out of regulatory problems. So you're asking the person that oversees that to say, hey, I have looked at that and we are doing these things. And so do you think it's problematic if we were to add, you know, some more risk management things to that report, that person is saying, hey, these are the key initiatives that we want to make sure we're getting done as we review the wire department, say. And yeah, we're doing those things and they report those however often it needs to be. So it'd be kind of, if it's high risk, it needs to be done often. If it's low risk, you know, we might do it every 3 years.
Yeah, so the question is, could you combine and make an expanded compliance and risk? Yes, as long as you know that they're different. Compliance has its own track. You have the compliance management.
Compliance is look back, risk management looks forward.
Yeah, and internal audit, of course, that's separate too. Internal audit has its own track, you know, it's all internal controls, you know, dual controls and all that. So yes, you can combine it as long as you're very specific onto these are risks, you know, because you may cover some other, like liquidity. You typically in compliance, you're not going to talk about liquidity. That's more in the ALCO. You know, the asset liability, that's where you talk about capital and credit and liquidity. So it's like in little groups and little silos. It's okay as long as everybody's talking. And that's why having this ERM committee, which is where the compliance is one piece, credit is one piece. Then, so it's
hard to get everybody together when you're covering this broad of effort. Yeah.
But you can do it. I mean, we did it at 250. I mean, it helped that all the employees, most of them reported to me, but hey, we're doing this. Everybody.
Marci, not a question so much as thought. I like that you brought up the opportunity side of the because we always think of just the risk, I think. And in my networking a couple years ago, I came across a bank that used their risk management funnel, they called it, to analyze every new opportunity they saw. And it made them more, I think, agile.
Yep.
And things they were willing to consider because they had a way to analyze it, and they'd already defined what they were willing to accept in terms of new opportunities, in terms of new lines of business.
Exactly. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, we learned, I got the idea, and that's why I created this strategic risk assessment for new initiatives. So then you can ask the questions from the strategic perspective, because when I was at the bank, one of the bankers, the salespeople come up with these brilliant ideas. They want a product they want to sell to one business. And we went, I mean, when you got a new product, it was a new checking account type. You have to integrate with the balance sheet, the income statement. You got to get into the core systems queue, and anyways, in the end, that one business client used it for a year. And all my operations people were so mad. I was too. And I'm like, this will never happen to us again. So next time, then I ask you questions. Is this a product that you can offer to all your business clients, or to if it's a consumer, to all the consumers in this, target market or whatever, or is it just for one? If it's just for one, is it profitable? So you ask the strategic and profitability questions in addition to what are the new risks that we could encounter from this new, we can have more questions at the end. I want to make sure I'm on time. Ooh, it's 11:48. Okay, so always start with your strategic plan, integrate ERM, establish the program with the 3 phases ongoing. Start with your ERM risk assessment. That is your core risk assessment for your ERM program. Complete the risk assessments enterprise-wide. Track everything, all the risk assessments, and complete them annually. Resolve the findings, implement recommendations and best practices. These are all sources that if you get the PDF of these, they're all clickable links. I write a ton of articles. I just wrote my over 100 articles on LinkedIn, and I write on leadership, strategic planning, ARM, treasury management. That's just info on me. I also want to offer you, thank you for coming last minute to my substitute teacher class. I want to offer you, I always do a 15-minute free on the phone, what I call strategic, ERM strategic assessment, where I just ask you questions, or your ERM person, your ERM leader, and then I give you a quick little report that can help you decide where you're at in the process. These are what I call my other children. And my gift to you is I put a couple books, so feel free to take one with you. If not for you, give it to one of your emerging leaders. This is my 4th book. It's a leadership book, and it's called, how when you get a new job or get promoted, someone tells you, oh, you have big shoes to fill? How many of you? So then that's where the title came, Bring Your Shoes. Bring your uniqueness. And it's a fresh perspective for leaders with big shoes to fill. From the maximizing talent. So you discover your own, you discover the talents of the people you lead, and then you lead by maximizing everyone's talent. So feel free to take one with you today. This is my contact info. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and I also have a newsletter, Learning with Marci, where I just share about my upcoming events. So thank you so much for today. I so appreciate you. Thank you for the questions, and I'll be here a few more minutes. So thank you.